Now, it has been a while since we streamed the first game, and I know that there are some other games as well that we haven't played, which are kind of an in-between between the two games. So I wanted to get caught up on the lore by checking out this video by a content creator who we haven't checked out in a very long time, Luetin09. As with all of our reaction videos, the link to the OG is always at the top of the description, so please, before we start, make sure to go support the OG video. And now let's get right into it. Been so long since we've seen that intro. And this was at the very start of the Space Marine 1, right?
Wear the mantle of hero. Inspire where you can. But remember always that we are the angels of death, not of mercy or salvation. What does it mean to be a Space Marine? A member of the Adeptus Astartes. To exist as such an individual is to number yourself among the most elite warriors humanity can bring to bear in the dark era of the 41st millennium, where human existence stands, as it has for thousands of years, on the precipice of total annihilation.
It is such a surreal feeling just playing as a Space Marine and seeing how the Royal Guardsmen act towards you. From what I remember for the first game, when you walked past them, they would acknowledge you, well, any who weren't injured and on the brink of death, in a way that one would act towards a being of great respect, or even like a divine being in a way, because the guardsmen don't stand too much of a chance against that massive horde of greenskins. But when you step on the battlefield, you become their hope. It's it's really, really cool.
From both invasive, innumerable enemies and the corrupting forces that emerge from within human civilization itself. The Imperium of Mankind is the galactic-spanning civilization of humanity in M41. With such a vast empire, mankind can bring considerable forces to bear in the defense of its imposing territory. The bulk of this forms the hundreds of billions of regular humans who join the renowned military force known as the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum. There are other factions as well, the zealous members of the Adeptus Sororitas, for example.
The Astra Militarum are so diverse, man. I remember checking out a video by Major Kill, I believe it was, just going over all the different regiments. But it also makes sense that there's a massive diversity considering how big the Imperium of Man is and how different all the planets are, so you just grow up differently and live in different environments and whatnot.
Smaller in number, but carrying with them the ever-burning wrath of the Emperor of Man. There are also those known as the Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, who can deploy their own armies along.
I can't wait for Mechanicus 2. I enjoyed the heck out of the first game. I still need to go back and finish the DLC for that. Might time it once we have a release date for the second game, because I don't think it's been announced yet.
Alongside the immense ancient war machines known as Titans. The Imperium itself contains many more specific forces and sub-factions that it can bring to the battlefields of the distant future, but none can even begin to approach the legendary reputation of those warriors known as the Astartes. They were created in the earliest days of the emergent Imperium as the Emperor of Mankind unified the tattered remnants of what had once been humanity during its zenith period of the Golden Age, known in the contemporary era as the Dark Age of Technology. By the time the Emperor was a known figure, those days of glorious unity had disintegrated into a total collapse of human civilization. This was brought about largely due to galactic war and subsequent isolation. The Emperor of Mankind emerged in this time to reunite and lead humanity as the most powerful being ever to call themselves human. A figure of godlike ability, able to draw strength and power from the warp, also known as the Immaterium. This is a parallel realm to our material reality, and whilst the Emperor does draw power from the warp, his interaction with it is on an entirely different scale than that of the ordinary psychic users. For he harnesses the warp's energy with a level of mastery which borders on the divine, and without any risk of corruption. This power imbues him with a psychic strength of near unseen capability.
Without the risk of corruption? Really? Like, the Emperor doesn't have to deal with any potential misfires at all? Oh, well, I mean, we're talking about Big E in his prime, so maybe it's different from what it currently is. I know that for your regular Psyker, while you can channel energy from the warp, there's always going to be that risk that you miscast it, and that you end up summoning chaos demons or opening a portal, or honestly your head just explodes. I think that's a specific thing for the orc psychers, but I would assume that for any regular human psycher that's also always a possibility.
His exact origins, life journey, and overall intentions, though, remain something of endless speculation, and remain shrouded in the mists of time. This is something that I have speculated and discussed upon greatly in other videos, but
oh, that's right. Luetin has another set of videos that he did about specifically the Emperor of Mankind. It's been something that has long been suggested ever since I first initially got into Warhammer 40k, and maybe something I'll have to check out sooner rather than later. I mean, we've discussed a lot about the Emperor, mostly in the comment sections for all of the Emperor TTS episodes, but this man has basically kind of always been there to help guide humanity from the backstage, coming in and transforming himself to be all these important figures, until inevitably he kind of had to step in on his own.
Most see him as a benevolent figure who saved humanity from complete annihilation, and in the successful wake of the reunification, launched his great crusade to reunite all humanity throughout the galaxy and form the Imperium of Man. The tool he would deploy to enable this grandiose vision: the Space Marines. To be an Astartes, though, is to live a life wholly disconnected from the rest of humanity. For while they may technically still qualify as human, they are in the most significant ways distinctly separated from what we would consider as such.
Yeah, just your physical body and all of your organs are completely different. Or rather, you have extra of them. I remember this being a point that was brought up during when we learned about all the Space Marine chapters. I think it was for the Salamanders. They're kind of the ones who are a little more lenient when it comes to dealing with civilians, and also the fact that they can go back and visit their own families too from time to time. I'm not really sure what the situation is with the other Space Marine chapters, but I'm assuming that's not really an option once you join the Space Marines. You kind of always have to be ready to deploy. But once again, that's likely just up to what Space Marine chapter you're a part of.
Space Marines undergo a grueling transformation process after selection to become Space Marine aspirants at an early age. Many will not survive the physically extreme overhaul, which will see them transition from base humans to genetically engineered warriors, stronger, faster, the elite of the elite. Their chapters, such as the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Black Templars, and Imperial Fists, only contain 1,000 battle brothers at any given time. When they are called upon to deploy to a conflict zone, it is...
Yeah, they were separated into chapters after the Horus Heresy, and I think that's because of the Codex Astartes, right? That's what it's called? That Gilliman set for everybody, to make sure that a rebellion like that never happens again.
It is often in small numbers to bolster or support a far larger existing planetary force, or to supplement a task force within a specific system. Space Marines only appear in large army-scale forces whilst on a crusade, such as the ongoing Indomitus Crusade, launched in the contemporary period of the Imperium. But there are of course
the Indomitus Crusade. So I know a bit about the Black Crusades, I believe. That's when the Chaos Space Marines try to make their way towards Terra, yeah? So I'm assuming it's kind of the opposite. Like your regular Crusades here with the Space Marines are basically expeditions into the Eye of Chaos.
Of course, always exceptions and times where a critical mass of Space Marines from a single chapter may be deployed. But by and large, smaller deployments
sometimes
are typical for the Astartes, such as we saw with TITUS and how he was deployed to Graia during the invasion of the Orcs and the later Chaos incursions. The Astartes numbered but a few, but were still able to turn the tide of that conflict. This is because Space Marines are able to operate in small numbers by their physical adaptations and the supporting hardware.
Oh my god, the Codex Astartes does not support this action. Oh, shut up. I forgot his name, but he was super cringe. And I think he reported us too at the end of the game.
Available to them. For Astartes can remain operational for days at a time without requiring any sustenance, they can go without sleep, and maintain a level of undiminished focus whilst operational. So advanced and significant are the changes in the physiology of an Astartes, they can even operate underwater or in the vacuum of space for short periods of time. Their body can rapidly heal small wounds, seal more significant injuries, seeing them able to fight on even should they suffer traumatic physical damage that would be terminal in ordinary humans. But all of their physical augmentations are supported by some of the heaviest personal armour available to humans within the Imperium. Power armour consists of ceramite plating locked onto the frame of an Astartes to form a fully enclosed suit. This is then articulated with dense fibre bundles and servos that not only enable the wearer to move, but significantly increase their strength. And while non-Astartes such as Sororitas or Inquisitors may be seen to wear variations of power armour, but these are specially scaled and adapted to enable those users to move with a level of dexterity, because power armour is very large and very bulky. Astartes, though, are gifted with an augmentation that only they are capable of enduring.
From what I recall, there are also special suits of power armor. I forget their names, but some Space Marine chapters or like some elite of the elite squads use them for special tasks or for equipping special weaponry that can only be used while having that kind of armor.
As the black carapace. This sits below their skin and is a critical augmentation to enable them to interface with power armor in the neural nodes that are studded throughout their body.
Oh, so that's what that is. You see all these, well, neural nodes on their body, and it's because of the armor that's underneath their skin. Oh god. I guess the only way you could get that under their skin is to peel all of it off and then stitch all of that back on. Is that one of the things that happens during that procedure? Eesh.
In the development of the Space Marines, this black carapace is known to have been one of the most difficult augmentations to develop and implement, and was in fact nearly written off. Eventually, though, it was successful and enabled the Space Marines to move and fight in their power armor as if they were not wearing it at all. And this is one of the major differences which separates Space Marines and unaugmented humans, for which trying to wear this kind of power armor and move with any reasonable dexterity would be all but impossible. And while all of these adaptations...
okay. So that's why, despite how big and bulky they are, they can still move at like lightning quick speeds. It's because the Space Marines, it doesn't feel like they're wearing armor at all. Or, I mean, I don't really know if feel like is the right term, but getting weighed down by their armor.
Adaptations are undoubtedly impressive and enable each Astartes to be effectively a walking tank, able to utilize a vast arsenal of weapons and tools to reach their maximum potential at all times. There is a significant price to pay. For while they may live lives far beyond the span of an ordinary human and remain untouched by all but the very worst plagues and diseases, to deploy with a strength of force and focus and wield the tactics to devastate and overwhelm the very worst enemies of mankind, bolstered by the machines of war to ensure that few if any could stand against them, the cost for all of this remains their humanity. Space Marines undoubtedly consider themselves part of human civilization. Many are known for their great ability to philosophize, craft masterworks of art, or spend centuries perfecting their martial skills.
Oh, well, I suppose an example of that would be the Salamanders with their forges and crafting of weapons. I think their Primarch's name is Vulcan. I would assume that he's like a master craftsman and can make great works of art when he's not making weapons. And there's likely many other examples that I don't know of.
Yet, it remains impossible to ignore the fact that they are gigantic superhuman warriors who spend minimal time in any activity that one would consider part of humanity. Given that Astartes spend their days battling among the worst theatres of war imaginable, the most visible role they take on, which brings them into contact with ordinary humans, is in the role of custodians or overseers of their territory and planets. For example, within the realm of Ultramar, home to the Ultramarines chapter, the vast territory here is divided into 5 sectors, each overseen by a ruling Astartes tetrarch. These overseers generally help guide and marshal the human governors and various administrative bodies who maintain a cohesive and stable authority. They may also appear on scouting missions or in an advisory capacity to ongoing campaigns, but this is largely the limit of their involvement with most mortal humans' day-to-day activities. Because while they may be seen as the saviours of humanity, the angels of death, the ultimate defenders who know no fear, and remain the Emperor's bulwark against the terror, Space Marines are truly monstrous. This is the exploration of character we see in figures like Dimitri and Titus, because to know and understand how a Space Marine operates, to live your life with only one certainty, that you will die in service to the Emperor of mankind, underscores the fact that for Astartes, their existence is for one purpose and one purpose only: war.
Yeah.
I will just note that from this point on, there are no major spoilers for the game of Space Marine 2 itself, but I obviously will be discussing in detail existing lore around Titus. This includes some of the small observations from previews and speculative discussion adjacent to the character of Titus.
Roger that. I don't want to go in completely blind. At least have something to discuss about once we do play the game. Or maybe get some references here and there. Try to absorb as much as I possibly can from this video.
All this includes some known aspects and entities of the Space Marine 2 game that have been revealed to us officially so far. So for any and all who wish to go into the game clean, this is your full warning. For those who want a more solid underpinning of Titus, we continue on. While many Space Marines will see their service recorded from inception to their inevitable demise, others lead more fragmented, twisting personal histories that sometimes will even see them set apart from their brothers within the chapter. Very often, this may be due to some event or dishonourable conduct that may or may not have been within their own control. Nonetheless, the responsibility always lands with the individual Marine and almost face the weight that comes with being an Astartes of the Emperor's Imperium. A Space Marine who is found to have slipped or otherwise lacking within any key aspect of their duty.
I mean, we didn't do anything wrong. I don't think we ever explained why exactly Titus could do the things that he was able to do or withstand like chaos powers in the first game. My assumption is that it was built different, either that or I'm forgetting something because it has been a while since we played. But last I saw of him, I mean, I already said this earlier, but he was getting hauled away by an Inquisitor. So hopefully he wasn't punished too severely.
Maybe temporarily sent to atone for their shortcomings, and this could mean assignment to a troubled backwater world, administrative duty, overcoming a personal flaw through the completion of a challenging mission or historically chapter appropriate quest, or some other miscellaneous area of service. In the most severe scenarios where one's faith or loyalty are questioned, they may even face interrogation by chaplains or even the Inquisition. There would exist no standardized period for this to take place over either, and it could mean months, years, even centuries of...
What's the difference between the Inquisition and chaplains? Are chaplains like... What does chaplains even mean? I apologize, English is not my first language. A member of the clergy attached to a private chapel, institution, ship, branch of the armed forces, etc. So I assume that each Space Marine chapter probably have their own that go along with them in order to make sure that no heresy is going on. But the Inquisition is like, you know, the big organization that comes in to interrogate, investigate, and exterminate us sometimes.
Isolation, with the testing of an individual's character and spirit by the most extreme means. This was the reality that Dimitri and Titus would face in the aftermath of the events upon
What the heck, man?
This would mark a dark chapter in his own personal history that even now remains largely shrouded in secrecy. Titus was born upon the agri-world of Tarantus, which sits within the realm known as Ultramar. This region of the galaxy has been defended and governed by the Ultramarines since before the heresy. Tarantus is part of a tri-system group known as the Three Planets, along with Quintan and Massili. The system and Tarantus have not existed though in calm isolation, having seen invasions by both Orc and Demons of the Warp. But given their status as part of Ultramar, both were purged and retained as key worlds within the domain of the Ultramarines. The planet itself is characterized by an arid environment, its inhabitants deploying extensive water traps to extract moisture from the dry landscape. Within its vast domed cities that are designed to maintain a more productive environment, they enable the populace to produce large quantities of food which are then shipped off-world and support other planets and systems within Ultramar. Titus was an only child from a modest family, but selected as a prospective candidate for the Astartes by selectors of the Ultramarines, a great honour in and of itself.
Wait, how does this selection process even happen? Now this is a part that I'm not really too sure on. I thought it was more of a volunteer to become a Space Marine, and if you survive, you survive. If you don't, you don't. Do these selectors just go around looking at potential candidates and being like, hey, you've got potential, kid? Is there a certain year during your education where they come over and are like, who wants to be a Space Marine?
Space Marine chapters may choose candidates for potential conversion from all manner of worlds and personal backgrounds, some even from lives as criminals before entering the trials to become an Astartes. There is almost...
I mean, isn't there an entire Space Marine chapter that's made out of criminals? I forget their name, but they're pretty cool as well. Or at least I like their armor design.
No restriction on where a chapter may draw its candidates from, and each chapter will be looking for specific criteria to meet their needs. After his successful induction and conversion to becoming an Astartes, Titus proved to be a formidable member of the Ultramarines, and within a mere 50 years had already risen through the ranks to become a decorated member of the renowned Second Company. Unfortunately, when the legendary battle for Macragge took place, which saw the Xenos known as the Tyranids bring the Ultramarines' homeworld to its knees, Titus was serving far from Macragge, and as the conflict raged, astropathic distress signals had been sent, but few were able to breach the smothering psychic wall.
The shadow of the warp. I didn't know the Tyranids got a really good hit in on Macragge. I guess the Ultramarines don't win every single battle, do they?
Produced by the Tyranids known as the Shadow in the Warp. A few, however, managed to reach out into the galaxy, and many deployed companies and strike teams of the Ultramarines raced to return and aid in the defense of their Primarch's world and Ultramar itself. Titus and the Second Company would arrive too late to directly defend against the invasion, but their numbers were critical in scouring all remaining Xenos from the surface of Macragge and the other worlds that were already being assaulted by splinters of the nightmare creatures from Hive Fleet Behemoth. In the aftermath of this infamous battle, the
Which one was Hive Fleet Behemoth? Was it the first or the second? I think there's been 2 invasions from the Tyranids, but I could be wrong.
Ultramarines' veteran First Company had been all but annihilated, and the chapter itself had to be substantially rebuilt. The then Second Company Captain Severus was promoted to the First Company, which then saw Luetin09 as the new Second Company Captain. His command squad sergeant was none other than Demetrian Titus himself. It would be in this period that Titus would
Is that freaking Kato Sicarius?
learn how to most effectively deal with the Tyranid menace, as he and the Second Company were deployed in numerous operations to remove the remaining splinters of that Xenos from across the many worlds of Ultramar. And what Titus learned from these deployments was the critical need to assess an enemy first-hand. And while some commanders may be content to sit aboard the bridge of a ship and assess incoming data to formulate a strategy, Titus found that personal experience and on-the-ground engagement was considerably more effective in creating a successful strategy.
I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense. You gotta be on the ground with your troops to fully understand the situation and how it evolves. And from there, you just become a better commander, because you already know what it's like and you see that image in your head rather than just getting a whole bunch of reports and numbers.
Trajan and Titus would stand together against the enemies of humanity for nearly a century, until fate would determine a new path for Titus. The Xenos known to humanity as the Eldari or Eldar invaded an imperial world, Beta Arcturus. And as is often the case for a Xenos known to have inhabited the galaxy millions of years before humanity emerged, this planet was once considered part of their own empire. But unlike so many of the horrors that face the Imperium, the Eldar are sometimes more civilized by degrees, and so the humans were given an ultimatum: evacuate immediately within 9 hours, or face their war host. Over a week.
I mean, for the Eldar, it's like, this is our planet. You guys came afterwards, so we deserve it back. And they were kind enough to give you a message rather than just completely annihilating all the humans there. So at least there's that. I think the Ultramarines are this chapter that take a more diplomatic approach whenever they can. So it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with this.
A week later, as the Ultramarines' second company, led by Trajan, arrived, they found a world ablaze. The Eldar of Craftworld Bieltan had laid waste to the Imperial cities, and the Astartes set about redressing the balance immediately.
Yeah, I guess there's no more room for diplomacy if that's what you've gone and done.
Drop pods and Thunderhawks rained down upon the world, and soon after, Trajan was already facing the Eldar commander, their autarch, in single combat. He would slay the Xenos leader, with Titus leading the command squad, carving a path through their aspect warriors who had formed a bodyguard contingent. Yet the Eldari had, in the chaos of...
I think the Aspect Warriors are kind of like a comparison to the Space Marines, but for the Eldar. We had talked about them before when we were doing our deep dive on the Eldar. Or actually no, I think they were briefly mentioned during our Eldar Exodites video. But from what I recall, they are very powerful warriors.
Battle captured one of the Astartes, a battle brother of Titus, Leandros.
Leandros?
Trajan led a squad...
Wait! Okay. I remember that name now. Fucking Leandros. I'm pretty sure it was him who threw us under the bus. So, he got captured by the Eldar. I'm gonna assume we rescue him, and then he reports us? What kind of ungrateful... Unless if I'm misremembering, no, but I'm pretty sure it was Leandros.
Wanted to recover him, but as is typical of the Eldari, it was a ploy to lure the Astartes into an ambush. Something that any Space Marine would entirely expect, but the numbers not committed to the battlefield surrounded Trajan and in short order cut him down. Oof. Titus and the Strike Force would recover Trajan's body and purge the remaining Xenos from the world, but the cost of victory had been considerably higher than any would have expected. Chapter Master Calgar would in the aftermath assign the regrettably vacant position of company captain to Titus. By the time Orcs began to invade the Forge world of Graia, Titus had already been captain of the second company for a decade and led an exemplary record against all enemies of the Imperium.
Gotcha.
Yet within Titus, there existed a personal trait that would lead him down a path few could have expected for one with such a service history.
Titus
had always been one to lead a little too strongly. He did not show restraint where others may have, and more importantly, did not always demonstrate enough self-reflection. For even among the Astartes, they are more than capable of displaying all too human flaws, as was evidenced throughout the heresy. But this is the entire purpose of the Codex Astartes, to provide structure, answers, and a set of principles to generally abide by. Upon Graia, Titus came into contact with a power source that demonstrated he held an unusual resistance to warp power. This immediately raised...
I know it's suspicious, but also you can use it. Like, who else is gonna do this if not Titus? If he wasn't there, then that planet would have just been doomed. Like, come on, man.
Suspicions among his battle brothers, including Leandros. Yet rather than heed their concerns, Titus believed only he was capable of completing the task at hand. This would lead to his eventual detention and interrogation by the Inquisition. Yet, his discipline as an Ultramarine would in the long term prove to be his salvation. For Titus had willingly surrendered himself to Inquisitor Thrax on Graia without resistance or excessive protestation. Despite the outraged calls from his companions, Titus recognized the Inquisitor's authority over all Imperial subjects, and despite being adamant that he was no heretic and had not strayed from the teachings of his chapter, Primarch and Emperor, to have turned against an Inquisitor would have been an effective death sentence. And
oh yeah, 100%. Like, the worst thing he could have possibly done in that situation was outright deny everything right then and there, protest, and then try to fight his way out. Because then, yeah, he would have been on the run for the rest of his life. You don't fuck with the Inquisition. They're gonna get you.
Admission of guilt in the eyes of those who suspected him of even unwitting warp corruption, and ultimately, yes, heresy. Titus would now be forced to endure the ultimate dishonor and humiliation, but fate had determined his path. In the fullness of time, his experiences would forever alter his view of Inquisitors, and understandably so.
Yeah.
But any freedom to exercise those views would not present itself for a considerable amount of time. This is where Titus disappeared out of sight and record, leaving the second company of the Ultramarines without a commander. This was when Cato Sicarius,
yes,
the now legendary captain of the second company, would be assigned that position.
I see. So he comes in after Titus because Titus is suspected of heresy and being questioned by the Inquisition. I, Cato Sicarius, have achieved victory over the impossible. What a guy. What a mad lad. So when Titus comes back, is he going to... Well, he can't, right? He can't just come back and then take his old position back anymore, so I guess he's just been effectively demoted? Dude, that sucks. But I guess Warhammer 40k as a whole, the environment, the living conditions just suck, so it's probably just the norm.
Titus, though, would spend over a century being assessed and interrogated by the Inquisition.
What? 100 years of interrogation? What? Bro, I didn't do anything. Oh, Titus. He fought so hard. It got so far, and yet in the end, it didn't really matter. Well, I mean, he escaped and, well, not really escaped, but survived all of that and is now in Space Marine 2, but, like, come on, man. Those are 100 years that I could have been killing Xenos.
Inquisition, spending large periods of that time in stasis. While the details are omitted, such interrogations are known to be brutal in both physical and psychic punishments upon an individual. To break them down, learn all that an Inquisitor can about whatever threat and, if possible, what knowledge one may have toward the forces that could be manipulating them. For the forces of chaos and the warp work in very strange ways, and it's common for an individual to not even realize that they may have been manipulated by the dark entities of the warp.
That is the unfortunate part of it, because that then makes everybody guilty until proven innocent. And you can't take any other stance than that, or else something might slip through the cracks and the entire system falls apart.
Those who dwell within darkness do not recognize the timescales of mortals either, and so a plan could be seeded by those of the warp decades, even centuries in advance.
Dude.
These would be aspects of Titus's proximity to the warp powers and chaos beings upon Graia that the Inquisition wished to establish. The detention of Titus came at the protestations of Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines. Titus would not be released, and in fact was never released. He only emerged from the depths of confinement due to the ironic possession of the Inquisitor who had detained him. For during the purging of a corrupted Astartes chapter, Inquisitor Thrax himself was possessed by a demon of the warp. This saw him immediately executed by the Grey Knights, who were conveniently alongside him during that deployment. And this of course left Titus, and many others that had been detained by Thrax, in something of a limbo state.
Wait, was he always possessed ever since, you know, we got turned over to him in the first game? Like, what did that... I mean, of course, the Inquisitors, they're gonna be a prime target for chaos, and their close proximity to all of it makes them extremely susceptible, so I understand, but, like, now what? Now that just calls into question all the people that he did capture, that maybe that was a part of the Chaos's plan, to remove them from the battlefield.
They would not be released until a team of Astartes from the Red Hunters chapter were dispatched to investigate this inquisitorial outpost.
The Red Hunters. I don't know anything about them, nor have I ever heard about them. I mean, judging from the color, are they Blood Angels? Okay, I searched up their wiki page, and most of it is unknown. Their founding was possibly the second founding, but you never know. They apparently have close ties with the Inquisition,
to which they soon discovered numerous Space Marines imprisoned within. All were held in stasis, and so were not subject to the passage of time, for this is often the case when dealing with long open periods of interrogation and assessment. The Inquisitor leading the team of Astartes to assess the holdings of Inquisitor Thrax did not call for the immediate destruction of all Astartes held
Thank
here,
goodness.
which they very well could have done. Instead, they were to be passed on to the Death Watch in the fortress of Watcher Keep for further evaluation.
The Death Watch?
Like so many Astartes before him, Titus now entered a period of effective penance within the Death Watch. The Death Watch are a highly specialised chapter of Space Marines who do not follow the template of most others, yet they're still loyal to the Imperium and the Emperor, for they are seen to be tasked with the most dangerous alien threats to the Imperium, and unlike other chapters, consist of generally veteran warriors from innumerable Space Marine chapters all throughout the Imperium.
So, basically the elite of the elite of the elite that gets sent to the most dangerous battlefields in the galaxy. Is this like a Suicide Squad kind of situation here? I guess them being aptly named the Death Watch is also kind of a dead giveaway, but that's my impression of it at least.
They are located in these so-called Watch Fortresses, which are spread all across the galaxy, and from here they stand ready to strike against any calls from the Inquisition or to respond to immediate Xenos incursions which might threaten humanity. These warriors are called to serve in the Death Watch in what is known as the Long Vigil. Often, this will be for veteran Astartes who have demonstrated considerable skill and acumen in service and will be inducted for what is officially a limited period of time, after which they may return to their original chapter.
I see.
In actuality, most will never see their chapter again.
Yeah.
Few, if any, though, would decline such an assignment, for to join the Death Watch is considered a great honour and a solemn duty, for they are the elite Xenos hunting wing of the Inquisition's Ordo Xenos, long-serving Marines who have demonstrated outstanding prowess, strategic insight, or have had significant encounters with specific alien species, are often chosen to bolster the effectiveness of Death Watch kill teams. Service in the Death Watch also allows Astartes to share and acquire valuable knowledge and tactics from the brothers of other chapters, fostering inter-chapter cooperation and strengthening the Imperium's overall defense.
That's cool.
For those who do return to their chapter, the experience gained during this tenure enhances not only the individual's capabilities, but also benefit their chapter upon their return, bringing with them advanced and up-to-date combat techniques, as well as strategic intelligence critical for future engagements with said Xenos forces. Yet there is another role that can see one inducted into the Death Watch: the Penitent. This is a Marine serving penance in the Death Watch that could have been demanded by their leadership within the chapter, but it could also be voluntary. For, say, a chapter that fell to chaos, but as was seen in the heresy itself, not all members of a legion nor chapter automatically are corrupted. Some who remain loyal may then choose to serve in the Death Watch in shame if accepted as a form of penance.
I see.
These Marines,
I mean, all of your brothers went to chaos and you somehow managed to survive, but you were still a part of that, in a way.
are most usually designated as an anonymous Marine known as a Black Shield. They're seen to bear no chapter mark, with their right armor pauldron displaying only featureless black or the silver skull of the Death Watch. This ancient tradition emerged during the heresy, and it was a means by which a Space Marine from a disgraced legion could continue to serve on, fighting against the traitors. So it is in the contemporary Imperium that an Astartes with heraldry obscured may present himself before a watch commander and petition for admittance to the Death Watch. He may not be questioned nor pressed to divulge anything about his origins, all such information having been ritually obliterated by the removal of his chapter's mark.
I mean, you might as well have them help you out, because you're gonna need every single Space Marine that you can get, and it's also good for them, for the Space Marine themselves, to, I guess, find peace.
To exist within the Death Watch as a Black Shield is no easy path, for most will avoid the company of other Astartes, remaining in self-imposed solitary isolation until the time of battle is upon them. It was to this reality that Titus now found himself facing, with little if any hope of being admitted back into the Ultramarines. Titus had been entirely isolated since his detention upon Graia by Inquisitor Thrax, and so as far as he was aware, such a significant period of time had elapsed that he now believed, in the eyes of his brothers, he had been effectively subjected to censure and would never return. Of course, unknown to Titus, the reality was entirely the opposite. Titus would fight on. He would not abandon service to the Imperium and the Emperor, for as the famous Imperial quotation states, only in death does duty end. Of course, on the other hand, it was the Ultramarines Primarch Rabute Guilliman himself who said of that quote, "Only in death does duty end, is no way to live." Unfortunately for Titus, this was the way by which he would live from here on. Yet he held no more of a personal desire to claim glory in the eyes of others than he had during his service in the Ultramarines. And while that may have been true, it did not necessarily mean that he'd always followed the path as laid out within the Codex Astartes.
Yeah.
Titus...
I mean, we already saw that during the first Space Marine game. He has his own beliefs, and for the most part, I think he's got his head screwed on right. Does things effectively, does them efficiently, and I would say is 100% faithful in service of the Imperium. So with that kind of impression, it makes a whole lot of sense when he joined the Death Watch that, yeah, he just silently continued to serve, to do what little that he can.
Chose a new name for himself while serving in the Death Watch, Nullus, and fully embraced his new identity as an anonymous Black Shield. He served as now merely a tool of the Emperor. He existed devoid of personality and brotherhood that he had known through all his years in the chapter.
That
now
sucks.
He was devoted fully to destroying the very worst enemies facing humanity until he would meet his eventual inevitable demise. During the Fourth Tyrannic War, which saw the greatly feared Tyranid threat re-emerge in Segmentum Pacificus,
never mind. There isn't just two. During the fourth one, so there's way more than that.
And would see Hive Fleet Leviathan launch a devastating invasion both here and into the Imperium's most critical Segmentum Solar, the Tyranids were soon observed to be significantly problematic, having adapted their tactics and evolved new bioforms to overwhelm Imperial defences. The conflict saw the involvement of various Space Marine chapters, Astra Militarum regiments and other Imperial forces, and one of the key aspects of this war was the unprecedented level of coordination between Imperial forces, including joint operations and the use of advanced strategies to counter the Tyranid swarm, something which was in small part due to the deployment of teams such as the Death Watch, who had early on been called to engage against this new threat, and after all who had significant experience in fighting these particular Xenos. Something which fast proved entirely necessary, as many among humanity's defenders in the region had no real comprehension of the foe they faced. At this time, most recorded assaults from the Tyranids had originated on the far side of the Imperium's eastern galactic region, and so those here in Pacificus and Solar were entirely inexperienced.
Assuming the complete opposite side, I don't really know the 40k map, but I do know that for the most part the Tyranids invade from the east side, where the Tau are, and the Ultramarines work together with the Tau sometimes in order to fend them off.
While deploying into the Residius system to reinforce Imperial Guard forces, Titus and their Corvus Blackstar was downed by flying Tyranid bioforms. Those who survived found themselves facing the horrifying numbers of aliens upon the surface. Titus would be wounded severely by a Tyranid Carnifex. With most others already dead around him, he prepared for the end.
Is that a name, or is that a specific kind of Tyranid? I wouldn't expect there to be any named Tyranids.
Yet by another twist of fate, he would now find himself reunited with his chapter.
Oh, my. A twist of fate, you say. But also, now that I think about it, there's probably maybe some sort of swarm lord out there that has been named. My memory fails me.
The Ultramarines were deployed here as part of a strike force to relieve the Death Watch. Despite the heavy losses and the sheer ferocity of the Tyranids, the Imperium managed to slow the advance of High Fleet Leviathan, though the war still remains ongoing and the outcome uncertain. But it was at this time that the Ultramarines had answered the screaming astropathic cries for aid that had been received throughout the galaxy as the Fourth Tyrannic War emerged. The Imperium in this time was already struggling to hold back the tides of darkness. With the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, the Ultramarines Primarch launching his Indomitus Crusade, and Ultramar itself only having recently emerged bloodied by the plague wars of the Death Guard, yet among those of the Ultramarines' First Company, who are well known as the Tyrannic Veterans, having survived the Tyrannic War in Ultramar and upon Macragge, promoted into the new First Company in the aftermath of that war, now as the Fourth Tyrannic War took hold, the First Company were headed at speed towards this new High Fleet, along with the First Captain Severus. They also carried with them Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius, one of the most powerful Psykers among all Astartes in the galaxy. But Tigurius is so powerful, he can operate as a battlefield commander, a psychic storm of annihilation when focused upon their enemies, and also an ethereal presence which can reach across the galaxy. And it would be he who detected the soul sign of the lost warrior they still knew as Demetrian Titus.
Dang. So I'm assuming this entire century that he's been gone and they've had no contact, he's always kind of been on their in their minds. That day they lost a good space marine, and so everybody was kind of looking out for him.
The strike force launched from Tigurius' vessel hit the planet like a strike from the ancient gods, and with Thunderhawks deploying veteran squads of Tyrannic warfare, the Xenos were soon being readily exterminated. Tragically, they had arrived too late to save the planet, but not too late to save Titus, who was recovered and urgently placed into Apothecarian bays aboard the Righteous Fury, the same vessel that he had once served in alongside Captain Trajan. Titus was wounded so severely that it was quickly established he could not be saved in his current form as a firstborn Marine. The only thing that could be enacted were the so-called Calgarian rites, his transition to becoming a Primaris Marine. Like so many who had crossed the Primaris Rubicon before him, Titus emerged stronger and more resolute than ever before, not least to find himself in the company of his brothers within the Ultramarines once again. Even more so when he awoke to find himself bestowed with the rank of lieutenant, serving under Captain Sevastus Acheran of the Second Company.
I mean, that's very nice of you. But also, what's a Primaris Marine? Because his body was so incredibly damaged that they felt like they couldn't salvage it anymore, so what, did they just give him a new body? Did they further augment his body or something?
Not all, of course, were so pleased to see the immediate return of Titus. Many still had questions, suspicions even, about where he had been for so long and what had transpired. Yet the exploration within the mind and soul of Titus by Chief Librarian Tigurius should have immediately laid to rest any such concerns, for Tigurius found no sign of any corruption within him.
So if Tigurius said that, then everybody should be okay, right? Unless if Leandros is still around.
Rank was reinstated by psychic communion with Marneus Calgar himself. The approval of the Chief Librarian and Chapter Master was an adamantine seal of approval that none should dare to question.
Okay,
so
good.
It was that Titus was reinstated as a member of the Ultramarines, having been dragged through the disgrace of inquisitorial suspicion, the humility of penance serving as a black shield, yet now finally emerging in the era that saw his Primarch Rabute Gilliman return to the Ultramarines and to lead the Imperium as Lord Commander. Titus was back where he belonged, to serve once more within the Second Company and to bring the unstoppable wrath of his chapter and the Emperor to all the enemies of the Imperium, as Titus remained under the ever-watchful eye of Marneus Calgar. In the era of M41 and humanity's great empire, the galaxy stands shrouded in a stagnating fog of ignorance pure confusion and widespread misinformation. With the return of the Ultramarines Primarch Roboute Guilliman, after extensive study, he concluded that the destabilized state of the galaxy, most especially in the shadow of the emergence of the Great Rift Warp that split the Imperium in two, it was now impossible to determine an accurate course of time as it had been recorded to that point. It is believed that in the contemporary Imperium, because of this galactic scale of disruption, time flows erratically across different regions of the galaxy, leading to events occurring out of sync or even fully out of sequence. This destabilizing situation can even cause entire star systems to become temporarily isolated, or more generally galactic communications to just be very unreliable.
I didn't know this was a thing, but considering how much chaos has affected the galaxy as a whole, that makes a whole lot of sense now. So canonically, events can indeed happen out of order, which, man, making all of that into a cohesive story that people can understand is gonna take a lot of work. Or maybe it's just in certain regions of the galaxy? Maybe certain regions are more heavily affected by that.
For the Imperium of Man, this has had a profound impact. Coordination of military campaigns had already been historically difficult, but the situation now only further exacerbated confusion and disorder across the Imperium. This did nothing to improve the fact that humanity still faced relentless wars and constant incursions by Xenos heretics from within the Imperium itself, and of course the forces of chaos. The result of all this disruption is that many systems within the Imperium have scant or outdated information available, even for the most elite such as the Adeptus Astartes. Whilst it remains critical that those at the forefront of the Imperium's defences have access to such information, they will often find themselves operating with incomplete or wholly inaccurate intelligence.
Oh, dang. That in and of itself could be the deciding factor of whether you win an engagement or a war. And it's unfortunate that we don't have some, like, super galactic computer that we can use to exchange information immediately. But I suppose in the 40k universe, that would be too nice of a thing to have.
They may be dispatched to worlds with little knowledge of the current state of affairs, encountering unexpected threats, or finding entire planets lost to the warp or overrun by enemies long before their arrival.
So
While historically, due to the nature of travel in the galaxy and the delays caused by Imperial bureaucracy, this may always have been true, the situation was now ever more pronounced. Quite obviously, any attempt to make efficient strategic planning became near impossible, and the lack of reliable information could lead to often disastrous outcomes. In the recent Tyrannic War, which saw Titus and his Death Watch crippled by the ferocity of the Tyranids, it was a prime example of how even where Astartes commanders are forced into relying on their instincts, adaptability, and the fragmented reports they receive, by the time they're able to enter a conflict and begin piecing together the true situation, this occurs only when they're already deep into the fray.
Jesus, so I can only imagine the only way to deal with this is to prepare squads for anything and everything. They all had to be extremely highly adaptable to any combat situation, and well, they don't even have the information to prep them with, because like the information that they currently have about how a current Xenos fights could also just be outdated already. So then, yeah, all you can do is just do your best and make sure the right people are commanding your forces, most highly adaptable people.
So while Titus may have been accepted back into the Ultramarines chapter, he has much to prove among his battle brothers, and nothing short of exemplary action will suffice. The Residia system is currently deemed critical by the Imperium. The specific reasons for this, though, remain unknown, but with a strong Mechanicus presence, there is
there's always a need-to-know basis when it comes to 40k.
Undoubtedly something deeper occurring here that has warranted such a heavy response from the Imperium. One would like to imagine that with Karaku, a Death World Mechanicus research outpost, only having a population of a few 100 million, and its neighbour Demirium, a barrier world that is effectively uninhabited, the main reason for a strong response would be the population of the hive world Avarax within the Residia system, numbering some near 200 billion souls, not to mention its immense production output. In reality, If we know anything of the Imperium, it is far more likely that whatever has caused the designation of this system as being strategic value absolute, it is most likely not the vast numbers of humans upon the world. While those among the Astartes would prioritize the salvation of such vast numbers of human lives if they could, the Mechanicus would most certainly
technology.
Not. In the aftermath of his retrieval from Karaku, it becomes evident for Titus that this is far from the end, and that his journey toward redemption begins here and now in the system of Residius. With their defences crumbling and the populations falling into despair, Titus may have emerged from the Death Watch and returned to the Ultramarines, but his life as an Astartes has immediately presented him with yet another problem: strict adherence to the mission or the billions of citizens at stake upon Avarax. Perhaps he can achieve both. Yet the Titus now is a very different man to the captain who waged a singular campaign against the Xenos Orcs and the Heretic Inquisitor and Chaos Astartes upon Graia. His risk...
I'm listening to the narration, but like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Just walking past them and seeing these hulking figures, just absolutely annihilating the enemy that you guys were struggling with. They do a really good job at representing like how much of a beacon of hope they are for the average human.
Risk-taking and somewhat cavalier attitude back then has been all but beaten out of him, and now he stands as a more pragmatic, objective individual with a clearer understanding of just what is at stake for the system and himself personally.
I see.
In Space Marine 2, all of these details are delivered to us through not merely dialogue, but the personal actions, engagements between the characters, and the environment around them. And for the small preview I have seen, the storytelling unfolds with an attention to detail that demonstrates to us the change we see in Titus. Residius represents his best opportunity for redemption in the eyes of his brother Astartes.
Ooh.
The system's dire situation offers an immediate chance to prove he has atoned for his past through securing a vital world for the Imperium. Utilizing his experience and skills developed in the Death Watch will be critical in his attempt to overcome the sheer scale of the challenges facing the system, a task that only a warrior of his caliber and his Primaris brothers can hope to secure in turning the tide against the Xenos horrors. For Titus's mission in Residius is not just a battle against the enemies of humanity, it is a deeply personal crusade, having been thrown back into the crucible of Xenos war so immediately after his return to the Ultramarines. One of the foremost issues in his mind is to reclaim his honour. Marneus Calgar had insisted that he be assigned the rank of lieutenant, even though Titus himself felt he was not deserving of such a rank and should have been more severely demoted. The defense of Residius is a critical point.
Man, Titus is so hard on himself. He literally did nothing wrong. Just by being put under suspicion of doing wrong, he feels like he needs to be punished.
Point in his life, for the weight of responsibility placed upon Titus here is immense. To emerge victorious, he must inspire and command the brothers who accompany him and stand resolute against an almost incomprehensible scale of enemy. Such, though, is the life of an Astartes.
Yeah.
Titus had at one point all but accepted his life as a Black Shield, and that he would most likely die in anonymous service to the Emperor and the Imperium. Yet here on the ravaged world of Avarax, he sees a sliver of possibility to achieve redemption, to fully restore his reputation and finally bring peace to the ghosts of his past. As the story unfolds, it is not merely the fate of Residius at hand, but that of Titus's personal redemption. For the two are intertwined. Only in victory will Titus be able to finally lay to rest the shame and suspicion that has shadowed him for so long, but dark forces are always working against him. This itself could be far more complex.
The Tzeentch Chaos Space Marine looking pretty fire, not gonna lie. I am very curious though, as to like what enemy types we'll be facing off against in the second game. Because when I went into the first one, I was basically expecting it to just be greenskins, but I was surprised at the actual variety and the appearance of another force. I hope we get a ton more variety in the second game.
Though than we may imagine, and the unfolding events of the campaign could still hold confusing aspects and suspicions that we are as yet still blind to. What are the Mechanicus doing within the Residia system? Why have they so recently resurrected activities here? And despite all the assessments and analysis of Titus himself, even by Tigurius, an air of unease in the eyes of his brother Marines still hangs around him.
I mean, it should be like an iron seal of approval, but yeah, you can't get rid of that human suspicion. And you can't really blame them. Like, anybody in their right mind should be paranoid of other people if chaos can so easily corrupt them like that. But it still sucks. Another thing that I hope for from the second game is how they tell the lore. Because I think in the first one, the lore was basically told through logs that you kind of had to explore and find, and you just kind of sit there listening to the log, and it wasn't really all that engaging. Hopefully they found a better way to do that in the second one. Because whatever the Mechanicus are doing here, it intrigues me a lot. I do quite enjoy the Adeptus Mechanicus, so I just want to know what they're trying to do, and how that might clash with all of our other objectives and ideals.
Past haunts like a permanent stain upon his character, and one that must surely be finally laid to rest here, or otherwise condemn him to a life of unbearable suspicion and penance. In this section, we stray into the realm of the speculative, but still entirely grounded within the possibilities of both the lore and personal character of Titus. Primarily, what we are considering here is the long-term manipulation of individuals by the beings of the warp, specifically Tzeentch, the great changer of the ways.
Yeah.
Although I also wanted to speak to the character of Astartes and also the way in which they choose to approach things and why, specifically in this instance Titus and Leandros. From the previews we have seen so far in Space Marine 2, we know that Tzeentch will be a faction in the game, and so it is fair to assume that they will play an important aspect in the campaign as it unfolds for Titus and his Marines. This raises...
I mean, if Tzeentch is involved, then you know some mindfuckery is about to happen. Or like some Space Marine that was maybe with you wasn't actually a Space Marine. He was disguised, a demon, backstabs you at a super important moment. But I guess it also depends on like how powerful Tzeentch's influence is in this particular combat. Maybe we could go even as far as to the extent that there are some missions or some particular engagements that you just imagine. It's not actually happening. Or maybe that has something to do with what the Mechanicus are trying to research. Oh, there's so many possibilities here.
Is the larger questions. Will they remain disconnected from the personal journey of Titus, or will it have a deeper meaning and a narrative connotation? I can honestly say, I do not know, but it seems to me at least an interesting question that is worth exploring, not least when we consider the words of Nemeroth, the Chaos Marine, at the heart of the conflict upon Graia, which saw Titus able to resist the powers of Nemeroth and even the warp itself. And this was something that Titus and his brothers were both confused and concerned by, which brings us of course to Leandros.
Because we never got answers for that, right? So is this all according to plan? Tzeentch is like all according to Keikaku, sitting there in the background, playing his children's card games with the Emperor. Is that what's about to happen?
Leandros was one of the newer members of Titus's command squad, and had demonstrated a trait often present in those who have successfully survived through to becoming an Astartes, that of a relative disconnect between the form they exist as now versus that of their prior humanity. It's not uncommon for Space Marines to display a cold indifference to mortal humans, and a tendency to look at things from the bigger picture. At face value, it's very easy to feel a dislike towards Space Marines with this outlook. They seem very cold, emotionless, uncaring about individuals. But in actuality...
I mean, yeah, but it's also understandable, because at that point, you also question your own humanity a little bit. Like, unquestionably so, you're going to be fighting for humans because you used to be human. And you still feel human, but you're just not the same anymore. And all that you do is in service of the Imperium, and so if the Imperium needs you to completely abandon your home planet for the sake of the Empire, then can you really go against those orders? It's not one of those situations where you can just follow what your heart tells you to do.
Becoming an Astartes is to see the galaxy entirely differently. because you no longer look at that small-scale personal level as most humans do.
Yeah.
Such an outlook comes with the position of becoming an Astartes. It's also why many Inquisitors see actions at a scale far above even the planetary. Some Astartes are better at balancing this than others, and it's something they may adjust from their experience over time. Some chapters of Space Marines are also known to display more empathy to standard humans than others, such as the Salamanders, where other chapters would see ordinary humans as little more than a means to an end, or just even numbers on a data slate. It's fair to say, though, that Leandros did not endear himself with his immediate character and his continual remonstrations with Titus. However, I've often spent time to consider, was this a fair assumption? Or was our view of Leandros more of an emotional reaction to someone who had seemingly become so disconnected?
Okay, so I will say that Leandros' suspicions, I feel like, were warranted. But because you're playing as Titus, and obviously Titus is doing all these amazing heroic things in order to save the Imperium, that it feels super unfair, but also even we as the players aren't really sure what exactly happened and why he can do the things that he does. And in that kind of universe, you have to suspect something, and you should suspect something, because if you don't suspect it and it becomes a thing, then you're going to be in trouble, and maybe the entire Imperium is going to be in trouble. So emotions aside, Leandros' assessment, in my opinion, was probably fair, but I still hate him for it.
From their humanity, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. But just to remind ourselves of that situation and the final events upon Graia. Titus had, by the later stages of that campaign, become determined to hunt down and kill the Chaos Sorcerer Nemeroth before he could harness the power of the Psychic Scourge, thereby fulfilling his plan to ascend to true demonhood. Having already shown a shocking resistance to the warp powers at play, Titus remained resolute, despite the very obvious dangers. Leandros, though, vehemently disagrees with Titus about continuing on. He continually asserts the instructions of the Codex laid down by their Primarch. Titus appears to brush this off entirely, in fact some would say showing a shocking disregard for the Codex despite being an Ultramarine. He seems to actively shun its instructions. I think to this end it is worth remembering just what the Codex Astartes is and when it was written.
Yeah, now I just know a general overview of the Codex, so it'll be cool to get some more details on it, but I feel like, from my understanding, Titus's viewpoint on the Codex was that it was more guidelines rather than rules to follow, and that was likely due to the fact that he has a lot of combat experience and understands that situations evolve. Having to play under a specific set of rules is only limiting their potential for achieving the end result of their mission. Because if we look at the two different outcomes that could come from it, it's like, you know, bend the rules a little bit in order to stop this Chaos Sorcerer, or follow the rules absolutely and lose the planet. Granted, we don't know if that's exactly what would have happened, but he had to make a decision.
So, the Codex Astartes was not created merely to act as a guide for chapter organization, tactics, and the general conduct of Space Marines. It does do those things, but Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, created it as a vital tome which would incorporate all the lessons they had learned and in the shadow of the heresy, so that in the millennia to come, even beyond potentially his own life, the Astartes should never fall to darkness in the ways seen during the Horus Heresy again, most notably resisting the corruption of chaos, because corruption from those of the warp was seen to be far more nuanced than any could have imagined. It did not take place in an acute form. It was not a pathogen or a virus that could easily be detected. It whispered in people's ears, it worked its way into their brain and their decisions, and it required a considerably strong framework to both resist and detect. So for this reason, among many others in creating the Codex Astartes, Guilliman hoped to prevent the catastrophic events of the heresy from ever occurring again. And the arrival of the Codex coincided with one of the most significant events in the history of the Imperium, the dissolution of the Astartes legions, and the replacement with chapters.
Yeah.
The rationalization was that no single force should ever be able to rebel on the scale of the traitor legions again, for the risk of such an occurrence to the Imperium and the Emperor was simply too great. So, returning to Leandros and Titus, although Leandros appears nagging and a bit of a Boy Scout, versus Titus basically just winging it and using his instincts and his experience. It's worth further analysis, because this leads directly into the situation we're about to discover in Space Marine 2. As discussed earlier, Titus during the events on Graia was, up to that point, an exemplary member of the Ultramarines. He had seen great success and commendation, but no Astartes exists without a sense of pride, and despite any assertions to the contrary. So I think it's more than clear that Titus was somewhat overconfident and even arrogant in his attitude. He had only seen success during his time as an Astartes, and that had seen him ascend to the captain of the second company in relative short order.
I suppose I have to agree with that assessment, because it would be impossible to say otherwise. Like, even if you become a Space Marine and you feel this disconnect from being human, that doesn't mean that you don't experience some very human emotions, and pride is most certainly one of them, and something that is easy to fall to, especially if you are very successful in most of your missions, or like almost all of your missions. I mean, it is certainly important to have a little bit of it so that you can be confident enough in the decisions that you make and evolve your combat strategies without having to sit and wait for somebody else who might be more experienced to tell you what to do. But still, at the end of the day, I think he had to make a decision, and this was the decision that he made. You could debate that there was another better way to do that, but it's hard to say, how exactly it would have turned out.
So why should he not face the threats that become clear on Graia any differently, even though the warning signs were all there? Leandros was doing what he was expected to do as a member of the Ultramarines. He was giving his contrary opinion to his senior officer and reminding of the purposes in the Codex to enforce discipline and control within the Space Marine chapters, thereby reducing the risk of any individual or chapter falling to chaos. The Codex emphasizes the importance of vigilance, purpose, and adherence to the Emperor's will, teaching Space Marines to be ever wary of the insidious influence of chaos. By codifying these principles in the Codex Astartes, Guilliman sought to maintain the strength, unity, and integrity of the Astartes, even absent to his presence, guiding them in their service to the Imperium of Man while safeguarding them against the corrupting temptations of chaos. So it is all the more surprising that Titus repeatedly tosses aside Leandros' concerns, pointing out that Titus has repeatedly shown this unusual resistance to the warp, and specifically ever since Nemeroth's invasion of Graia, something as noted that even Nemeroth appears intrigued by Titus's resilience. And Titus continues to minimize these concerns even when they learn that the Inquisitor involved here was dead right from the start and had merely been puppeted by Nemeroth. The situation should have been significantly concerning, and Leandros doesn't go so far as to just outright accuse Titus of heresy. He is simply voicing his fears that whatever is behind the captain's resistance to the warp might inadvertently aid Nemeroth and compromise their mission. Now, to be completely clear, no matter how things eventually turned out, that is far from being unreasonable advice. And
I mean, yeah, I had already said this earlier. It was a reasonable call, but one thing that I do want to point out is that we had talked about the existence of chaplains before, and from my assumption, they're like part of the Space Marine chapter and kind of act as somebody who investigates whether or not we're sticking to the Codex or we've been corrupted by chaos. Instead of going to the chaplain, Leandros went straight to the Inquisition, and that's even worse than throwing you under the bus, because they put us into stasis for hundreds of years and interrogated us for that entire time, and did we even deserve that? When you sick the Inquisition on somebody, that's like a goodbye, I never want to see you again kind of thing, which I don't think the chaplains would be to that degree of, I guess, paranoia or to that degree of cruelty. Now, I could be wrong with that one because I don't know too much about them, but from my assumptions of how the system works, I feel like that would be how it goes.
Despite the ultimate conclusion to the situation on Graia, TITUS exhibited here a clear arrogance to ignore the more pragmatic evaluation and adherence to the Codex as generally seen and expected of the Ultramarines. TITUS dismisses Leandros' concerns and sets off to confront Nemeroth, determined to prevent the sorcerer's ascension. In short, TITUS continues to demonstrate this headstrong attitude that is his entire personality. Leandros is deeply troubled, and with fair reason. These are exactly the kind of behaviours that Astartes who have fallen in the past tend to display, and that Space Marines are taught to be very cautious of. It's more than reasonable that Leandros becomes convinced that TITUS may well have been corrupted, because often this can happen without an individual even being aware of it. This, of course, culminates in Leandros contacting the Inquisition. Meanwhile, TITUS successfully defeats Nemeroth and seemingly destroys the power source, closing that warp rift, securing victory, just as Imperial reinforcements arrive. Despite this success, TITUS is taken into custody by Inquisitor Thrax due to Leandros' accusations. And as TITUS is led away, Leandros confronts him, insisting that the Codex Astartes clearly marks him as a heretic, arguing that no one could resist the warp as TITUS had without falling to corruption. Now, I hate to say it, but Leandros is 100% correct here. He always gets the bad rap on the backside of this campaign, because of course TITUS is the hero.
Yeah.
But Leandros is fully justified in his actions here. In response, TITUS asserts that the Codex Astartes is a guide that instills honour within the Ultramarines, but it is how each Space Marine chooses to live by those rules that truly defines them. TITUS implies that in his rigid adherence to the Codex, Leandros has failed to grasp the deeper meaning and the true test of a Space Marine. The perspectives of both entirely questionable, because while it may be true that in this specific instance TITUS was correct, he himself is also missing something. On balance, there is no clear-cut definitive answer, and perhaps that is entirely the point. Likely, Leandros needs to understand that to follow the Codex too rigidly in itself can invite disaster.
I mean, it's just one of those classic scenarios of if you lean too far to one side, it's a bad thing. You gotta have a balanced approach to it and walk the middle path. Of course, if you want to get even more nuanced with it, it entirely depends on the situation too. But we don't know what the right call is at any given moment, so...
Something that has been historically demonstrated for the Ultramarines. But TITUS also needed to more objectively understand that his flippancy to which he ignored the lessons of the Codex placed him in his current predicament and could have led to the entire failure of the mission and worse.
Potentially.
Of course, it is difficult to really see, given the situation they were in, what TITUS could have done differently. Graia had to be defended, Nemeroth had to be defeated. Whatever was occurring with TITUS at the time was far less of a priority. However, that still does not discredit or dismiss the concerns of Leandros, which are fully justified. And that to me is the critical aspect to understand here. It's not about taking sides, it's understanding the complexity and difficulty for Astartes in trying to judge just what they should be doing in such a scenario. TITUS implied in his passing statement that Leandros was incorrect in his actions, and that is where he himself was wrong. As Nemeroth said, only a deep connection to the warp could explain TITUS's ability to resist it, and the chaos.
So then what is this deep connection? Who and how and when and why? Are we gonna get answers through some sort of Tzeentch demon? Some sort of Tzeentch space marine coming in to tell you, haha, you've fallen into our trap that we laid 100 years ago.
The sorcerer even questions if this means TITUS will soon be joining them. He can feel and detect something in TITUS at that time. Presumably, this is something he's seen before, and that's the huge red flag here. Despite TITUS surviving the interrogations of the Inquisitor and his subsequent time in the Death Watch, even the assessment of Chief Librarian Tigurius, there was something happening to him upon Graia that seemed to shake even the Chaos Sorcerer. Given that position, it's more than plausible that Leandros should raise a strong concern that required the involvement of both the Inquisition and the supporting Black Templars to ensure that Titus came quietly, because had he not, they likely would have executed him right there on the spot. There are far too many examples to consider where we have seen individuals of a resilient constitution still manipulated by chaos against their will, entirely unknowing that it was taking place at all until the very last moment. One of the most notable, which always comes to mind perhaps, is of course Inquisitor Sabathiel, who has seen more than her fair share of connection to the warp even.
Okay, I don't know about this particular Inquisitor, but yeah. Being a part of the Inquisition and working with people like this, I feel like it's inevitable, unless if you're incredibly unshakable.
In her resurrection. But it is just one example of somebody who had a powerful belief in their own actions, a clarity of vision, who was 100% certain they were taking the right course and they knew what they were doing, only to find themselves become a pawn in the great game of the Chaos Gods. And of course Sabathiel faced execution from the Grey Knights. The question regarding Titus and his ultimate status is an open one, and something that we may well learn more about through the Residius campaign. For while his own choices ultimately led to his penance within the Death Watch, the resistance he had to chaos was seemingly not of his own making. In the fullness of time, Titus's commitment to a path that, while not easy, could ultimately become far more important historically, could well be the path the Emperor laid out for Titus. I feel a relevant adjacent...
It's so hard to decide what it is. We can only pick apart bits and pieces of info that we've been given, and it's just unclear. Like, as much as this entire path and this ordeal, the journey that he's gone through, could have been something that the Emperor has foreseen, and thus led him down this path, potentially gifting him these kind of powers to resist the warp even, it could just as well be the act of some sort of chaos demon messing with him, calling him to the dark side. Or it might be one of those situations where he is in a position to change everything, but it's up to him to make that choice at the end. And if it is that kind of situation, then I feel like he would ultimately choose what is best for the Imperium in his eyes. I'm willing to put my faith in this man, but I understand why others may not.
An example to put in here regarding the need to remain open to the interpretation of rules comes from the legendary Ultramarine Aeonid Thiel. Thiel was a sergeant during the Heresy, and it had become part of the Ultramarines' identity to emulate their Primarch and Forge theoreticals to best protect and counter against all the enemies of mankind. Thiel, though, was judged to have gone too far when he theorized that they should also begin considering the possibility of having to combat Space Marines as well as Xenos.
But he was entirely right. He's like, yeah, let's be prepared, guys. And everybody was like, no, don't think about fighting Space Marines. That's heretical. And look what happened.
Important to remember that in this time before the Heresy broke out into the open, the concept of an Astartes fighting another was considered all but impossible.
Yeah,
and that even voicing this was tantamount to treason. For his theoreticals, Thiel was marked for censure. Effectively, this was a disciplinary punishment, and his helmet was marked red for this reason. Yet at this time, the Word-Bearers' traitor Marines unleashed their infamous assault upon Kauth. Thiel saved a chapter master from a demon incursion and would follow this with his theoretical that in a battle against their fellow Marines, the Ultramarines' greatest weakness was their staunch predictability, while the Word-Bearers' greatest advantage was the shock of their betrayal. The only way for the Ultramarines to regain the initiative would be to dispense with both. They should use unorthodox tactics and strategies to wage a brutal campaign against their former brethren with all ferocity, entirely uncharacteristic for the Ultramarines.
I mean, it makes sense. They all know each other's tactics, so all you can do in that situation is mix it up. That way, it brings it back on an even playing field. This guy was just ahead of his time. Hopefully, whatever shame or disgrace he had to face from being punished like that was removed after all this happened.
During the Battle of Kauth, Guilliman ordered that all squad leaders accompanying him paint their helmets red, because the Word-Bearers' attack had shredded the Ultramarines' normal command hierarchy and organization, and also communication was very unreliable. Guilliman wanted clear visual markers for the Ultramarines to follow. In the aftermath, Thiel's visionary heroism and theoretical prompted Guilliman to enshrine that red markings would now be a badge of honor instead of censure, something that the
recontextualizing that
Ultramarines continue to carry in their aesthetics to the contemporary Imperium some 10,000 years later, where all sergeants now wear the red helmet. Now, beside Aeonid Thiel being one of my favourite Space Marines in the history of 40k, what is the point of this story? Well, it seeks to illustrate that there is a need, as Titus demonstrated, to sometimes take a path that is not the easy choice so long as the theoretical is sound. And that is something that their Primarch has always been clear on, to hear all sides no matter if they appear at face value problematic, because that is the genius of Guilliman, to remain open and objective to all considerations. This was the true failing of Leandros. He was too closed-minded, but Titus's failing was in not heeding the warnings of the Codex sufficiently. It was an impossible situation, and one which can only be concluded in this coming campaign.
But dude, what if whatever Titus has is something that can give the entire Space Marine chapter a leg up against Chaos? And he's just ahead of his time too. Just like this story, where we all got the red helmets. Oh, man. There's just so many ways it could go, and honestly, they had some really good setup from the first game to the second game, so I guess I'm just gonna have to play it and find out for myself.
Because with the presence of Tzeentch clearly seen to be operating in the Residius campaign, Titus needs to lay to rest the unanswered questions about this ability to resist the warp. Why the voices from the Immaterium were so keenly asking him, "Will you be joining us soon, brother?" Was there puppetry at play here? There are very likely other unseen actors who will lead us into a final act that may resolve the question of Titus once and for all.
Oh god, I just had the worst thought ever. Imagine we don't get any answers to this and they just tease another Space Marine game. That would hurt so much. Let's hope that's not the case.
The fundamental principle, though, is the danger of chaos. For chaos corruption can occur openly or inwardly, consciously or unconsciously, and even when it does not have a clear answer, one way or the other, the events upon Graia demonstrated how it can divide and break the bonds between loyal brothers of the Astartes, just as it did in the Heresy. This is one of the most enduring, ever-present dangers that face Space Marines, and has not changed since the final end of that great war. The big question, of course, is, what are the sorcerers of the Thousand Suns doing here? What powers or ceremonies do they seek to unleash, and how critical will the strength of Titus be in unlocking whatever mysteries they seek to conceal? The Demetrian Titus of this campaign will not be that same individual we saw upon Graia. He is an entirely changed figure who has hopefully learned that the most challenging of personal journeys for an Astartes, and specifically for an Ultramarine, is to balance the strength of one's own individual instincts and experiences, and ego and pride, against those that are taught by the hallowed Codex Astartes.
I hope that the Titus that we play in Space Marine 2 is sufficiently stronger than the Titus that we play in Space Marine 1, because he's already gone through this whole history of being with the Death Watch, which, from what we've heard, are the elites of the elites, with just strategies being exchanged between different Space Marine chapters and being put on the most dangerous of all battlefields in the galaxy. So this man's gotta be built different, and I hope we're able to correctly convey that through just the gameplay and how it feels to play him again in Space Marine 2.
In this campaign, Titus will be a distinctly more grounded individual, and with his new Ultima brothers by his side, Titus will bring his experience, insight, and tutelage to the new Primaris Marines of the Second Company, Chiron and Gadriel.
I guess because he's also a Primaris Marine now too, which I'm going to assume is like an advanced
is more
form
than
of
just a
Marine.
setting for games and novels. It's a living narrative that immerses us in the darkest of futures where humanity's survival exists on a knife edge. Simply put, there are so many ways to enjoy the setting of 40k that how we approach Space Marine 2 itself will be entirely individual. Many appreciated recently my long static gaze at the background of the game in the recent preview, but others wanted far superior gameplay than I could hope to provide. And then there are of course those who want nothing more than to just see and experience the new narrative of TITUS explored. All of this highlights how 40k, with its deep lore, myriad factions, and relentless background of war, isn't just about experiencing a new game. It's about diving headfirst into the world of 40k in a way that feels both familiar yet also thrillingly new. Within the galaxy of M41, the stakes are incredibly high, and the lines between heroism and damnation often blurred. It's often said that there are no good guys or bad guys in 40k. A very debatable point, but one which hammers home the ethical weight placed upon the decisions facing the characters in such times.
For sure. I've said this many times throughout many different videos, but it's always nice to have that character that is just good and that character that is just bad so that we can, fully hate that character for who they are. But I do also enjoy the nuances of characters that need to make tough decisions that could be seen as evil to some and benevolent to others. Because realistically speaking, for this fictional grimdark universe, there isn't always going to be an option where you can save everybody, so you have to make those tough decisions.
For myself, I always want to see a game that embodies the relentless, brutal nature of 40k, where sacrifices have to be made and the grim realities of war are ever present. This means not just engaging in epic battles against waves of Tyranids and other Xenos, but also feeling the weight of the lore, seeing the decay of ancient worlds, hearing the hymns and accounts of the Adeptus Mechanicus as they maintained their war machines, breaking...
I hope we get to make decisions, or it's probably a linear story, but even then, I appreciate it when games have something tangible for the player to see or interact with based off of a decision that was made during the course of playing that game. Like, it would be so interesting to see, well, obviously the people that you had saved and how they react to that, but also maybe the people that you had to condemn because of your actions and how they react to you abandoning them. Don't know if we'll go that deep in Space Marine 2, but I'd be interested to see if any of these kind of themes are brought up.
Walking through Xenos and heretic nests and shrines, crushing traitor Astartes, walking among those ordinary citizens of the Imperium, and experiencing the desperate prayers of the Astra Militarum as they hold the line. For me, one of the most exciting aspects also for Space Marine 2 is the promise of the broad spectrum of missions which will take us through a host of environments, from claustrophobic hive-like structures and gothic crenellations to the choking jungles of a death world or the desolate wastelands of an Imperial cemetery world. All should help us to deepen our immersion, because I want Space Marine 2 to take us deep into the heart of the 40k setting. One of the most derided aspects of the first game was one of the most compelling for myself, that fundamental mechanical satisfaction of combat, and this was something that I can already feel in the new game from the previews, but the intensity is dialed up considerably. The visceral thrill of smashing through enemies with a chainsaw, the cracking thud of bolter fire.
Heck yeah. That was one of the strongest points of the first game, was definitely the horde combat. Like, they got that down. It was super engaging, very, very fun, and it didn't last so long that it would tire you out or bore you. I did feel like, though, that there were moments where they could have had something there instead of just those moments where you just sat there in the elevator silently. Because those were kind of the moments where they tried to hide a loading screen, right? But, maybe having some lore there would be nice, or some conversation or character building. And I hope to God that we've gotten rid of all the QTEs. Like, QTE boss fights, I think, are fine if the rest of your game also has similar systems to that. One example I can think of was a game that we played recently here on the channel, which was Marvel's Spider-Man. Because the majority of boss fights, as well as the core gameplay itself, kind of involved you just pressing a few buttons in combination with each other in order to do some really cool, awesome superhero stuff. So when the final fight was also a QTE, albeit a very dramatic and engaging one, it didn't feel like a total letdown like what the last fight in Space Marine 1 was like. I'm also hoping that the boss fights in general are just more engaging and have a interesting mechanics, because the first one, I guess the other fights were okay, but they weren't good.
And the sheer power of a well-timed jump pack landing as you crash into the enemies like a bolt of lightning. Space Marine 2 seems to be solidly delivering that sense of brutal, exhilarating action that made the first game very memorable. But now also the addition of cooperative gameplay, which promises extended replayability and the enjoyment of tailoring your own Marines with their custom aesthetics and stat tree builds. The ability though also to replay missions with different team compositions is greatly exciting, not least because it raises the prospect of being able to bring new people into the space of 40k and help walk them through their first steps onto the path of full immersion into the galaxy of M41, something I have found myself already inundated with invitations for. Space Marine 2 releases September 9, 2024 on PlayStation 5, Xbox and PC. But you can play up to 4 days early with the Gold or Ultra editions, which are available for pre-order now. Will Space Marine 2...
Yeah... I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. I don't like the idea of paying a premium to play a game earlier than everybody else. That doesn't sound like something healthy that I want the game industry to continue doing, so that's why I'm kind of waiting for the official release date to stream the game.
Live up to the hype, we will know soon enough. But many who I know who have previewed the game already, and you have likely seen, are feeling pretty confident that this could indeed be the ultimate 40k experience, because to play this game is awe-inspiring. It's a game which fulfills the desire to take on the role as one of the Emperor's angels and lead the fight to the Xenos and the heretics in the grim dark future, where we battle for the fate of billions and indeed all mankind. For as ever, there is only war.
Heck yeah. Luetin's videos are always so good, man. Can't wait to get my hands on the game myself and see how it is, but as of recording this, the game should have already officially released. For those of you who are playing it, please feel free to let me know what your impressions are of the game in the comments below. Obviously, no spoilers though, for everybody else's sake who may not have played the game yet. But yeah, that's gonna be it from me. Thank you so much for watching, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the Space Marine 2 streams. Later, dudes.